What would you say if I told you that a man's entire legacy, years of sweat, missionary journeys, and miracles alongside the greatest apostle in history, was dismantled by just 7 Greek words? 7 words written in a dark dungeon that turned a hero into a warning for 2,000 years. Sounds like a harsh judgment, right? Like a villain's origin story. But this man was not a villain. He was not Judas Iscariot. He was not an enemy agent or a spy sent to infiltrate the early church. He was a leader. He was a fellow worker. He was a man who stood shoulder to shoulder with the Apostle Paul when the cost was highest, until he didn't. His name was Demas. And if you think you know his story, if you have heard he was just a traitor who abandoned the faith, you need to hear the truth. Because Demas was not what most people think. There is a specific psychological shift happening in believers right now, perhaps even in you, that matches the profile of Demas exactly. A detail that reveals the difference between abandoning a mission and abandoning Christ himself. So stay with me, because the story of the man who had everything but lost it all to the love of this present world begins now. Let us return to the year 67, Anno Domini, to the final cold days of the life of Paul. To understand the fall of Demas, we must first understand the nightmare of Rome under Emperor Nero. By the year 67, the city was a place of paranoia and blood. 3 years earlier, in the year 64 Anno Domini, the Great Fire had devastated Rome. Nero, looking for a scapegoat to deflect the anger of the people, pointed his finger at a small, misunderstood sect. The Christians. Picture the atmosphere in the Roman streets. Every shadow held a potential informant. Every knock at the door could be the Praetorian Guard. Being a Christian was no longer just a social stigma, it was a capital crime. Roman historians like Tacitus tell us that Nero turned the execution of Christians into a public spectacle. He did not just kill them, he mocked them. He covered them in the skins of wild beasts to be torn by dogs. He nailed them to crosses. He used them as human torches to light his gardens at night, while he drove his chariot through the smoke and the screams. This was the world in which Demas had to decide who he really was. This was not the house arrest of the first imprisonment described in Acts chapter 28. Back then, Paul lived in his own rented house. He could receive visitors, he could teach. He was a celebrity prisoner, but in the year 67 Anno Domini, everything had changed. Paul was now in the Mamertine prison. To see what Demas saw, we must look down. The Mamertine, known as the 𝘿𝙀𝙈, was not a room with bars. It was a cistern, a dungeon carved 12 feet into solid rock beneath the streets of Rome. There were no windows, no ventilation, no light, except for a small circular hole in the stone ceiling. Through that hole, prisoners were lowered on ropes like buckets into a well. The floor was often covered in filth because the Cloaca Maxima, the main sewer of Rome, flowed just feet away. Imagine the smell, the damp, bone-chilling cold that seeps into your skin, the absolute silence, broken only by the scratching of rats and the sound of the city above you. And there, in that hole, sat an old man, Paul, a man whose back was a map of scars from 30 years of service. His eyes were failing, his hands were shaking from the onset of winter. He was a dying lion in a stone cage, and Demas was right there. He saw the reality of the cross. He saw that following Jesus did not lead to a palace in this life, but to a hole in the ground. Real quick, if this story is already making you examine your own heart, if you are beginning to see your own Thessalonica taking shape in your mind, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because what Demas did next will show you the exact anatomy of desertion, and you will recognize the pattern in your own life. Every week, we bring you these forgotten warnings, biblical characters whose failures teach us how to finish well. Stories that do not just inform you, they transform how you see your own journey with Christ. For years, Demas had been part of the inner circle. In the letter to the Colossians, Paul mentions him. In the letter to Philemon, verse 24, he calls him a fellow worker. Think about that title, a fellow worker of Paul. That is a higher rank than most of us will ever achieve. It means he was there when the churches were planted. He was there when the riots broke out in Ephesus. He was there when the miracles happened. But the Mamertine was different. The pressure was building. Nero's madness was reaching its peak. Every day that Demas stayed in Rome, he was signing his own death warrant. The survival instinct, that ancient primal voice in the back of the human brain, began to whisper to him. It told him that he had done enough. It told him that Paul was going to die anyway. It told him that there were other cities, safer cities, where he could still be a Christian without having to die like a dog. Before we answer that, we need to understand the geography of his fear. He looked at the map and he saw a way out. He saw a city where the lights were still on and the churches were still safe. He saw Thessalonica. We often imagine the fall of a man as a sudden explosion, but it is rarely that. It is a slow leak. It is a series of small, reasonable compromises. Demas did not wake up one morning and decide to hate Jesus. He simply began to value his own life more than the mission. He began to look at the lights of the city above and compare them to the darkness of the dungeon below. In the darkness of that cell, Paul reached for his parchment. He was writing his final letter to his spiritual son, Timothy. His heart was heavy, not because of the chains, but because of the empty seats around him. He began to list the names of those who were gone, and then he penned the 7 words that would define Demas forever. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 10, Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Deserted. The Greek word is 𝘿𝙀𝙈𝙈𝙎. It is a strong, visceral word. It means to leave someone behind in a state of helplessness, to abandon a comrade in the middle of a battle. It is the language of a soldier leaving his post while the enemy is at the gates. But why? Why would a man who had seen the glory of God walk away from the greatest man he had ever known? Paul gives us the answer, and it is more terrifying than any sin of the flesh. Because he loved this world. The Greek word for world here is aion. It refers to the present age, the system, the comfort, the security, the now. Demas did not fall in love with a woman. He did not fall in love with money. He fell in love with the idea of a safe, predictable life. He wanted the sun of Thessalonica more than the shadow of the cross. But here is the question that should haunt us. If you were standing in that sewer, smelling the rot, hearing the guards sharpen their swords, and knowing that your execution was scheduled for tomorrow, would you have stayed? Or would you have found a very logical reason to leave? The choice of Demas was not a choice between Christ and the devil. It was a choice between the eternal and the immediate. And before you judge him, you need to understand where he went, because the destination he chose tells us everything about the subtle trap that might be waiting for you right now. Demas deserted Paul. He turned his back on the hole in the ground and walked out into the Roman sun. But he did not just run away. He ran towards something specific. He went to Thessalonica. To understand why this matters, we have to look at the map. Thessalonica was roughly 800 miles away from Rome. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the distance from New York to Atlanta. That is 2 to 3 weeks of walking through hostile territory. It was a major port city, a hub of commerce and culture. But most importantly, it was a city with an established church. Paul himself had planted that church. This is the detail that changes everything. Demas did not go to Thessalonica to open a tavern or to join a pagan cult. He likely went there to go to church. He went to a place where he could still be called a Christian, still sing the hymns, and still talk about the gospel, but without the lethal risk of being in Rome. He chose a comfortable Christianity over a costly one. Think about the journey. Every step that Demas took away from Rome was a step towards safety. Every mile that passed made the screams of the martyrs in the arena sound a little fainter. Every night he slept in a warm bed, the memory of the cold Mamertine walls began to fade. He had weeks to turn back. He had hundreds of opportunities to say, "What am I doing? Paul needs me. The mission needs me." But he did not. He was under the spell of the present world. The Greek word aion describes the spirit of the age. It is the pressure to fit in, to survive, to enjoy the fruits of this life while we still can. We often talk about the world as if it is only about drugs, sex, or greed. But for Demas, the world was simply the absence of the cross. It was the desire for a life that did not hurt. It was the pursuit of the good life at the expense of the godly death. And this is where we see the heartbreaking contrast in Paul's letter. In the very same breath that he mentions the desertion of Demas, he mentions someone else. "Only Luke is with me." Luke, the beloved physician, the man who wrote a gospel and the book of Acts. Luke was a man of high education and status. He could have been anywhere else. He could have been practicing medicine in a wealthy villa, but he chose to stay in the stench of the dungeon. Why? Because Luke understood what Demas had forgotten, that the presence of God is often found in the places the world hates most. But then Paul says something that should give us all a profound sense of hope. He says, "Get Mark and bring him with you, because he's helpful to me in my ministry." Wait a minute. Mark, John Mark, the same Mark from Acts chapter 13. Years earlier, on the first missionary journey, John Mark had done exactly what Demas just did. He got scared. He saw the mountains of Galatia, he heard about the dangers, and he turned around and went home to his mother in Jerusalem. He deserted the mission. Paul was so angry with Mark that he refused to take him on the second journey. It caused a massive split between Paul and Barnabas. For years, Mark was the man who had failed. He was the deserter. He was the one who could not handle the heat. But here, at the very end of his life, Paul is asking for him. Mark had been restored. Mark had found his courage again. Mark had moved from desertion back to the mission. He eventually wrote the Gospel of Mark. He died a martyr's death in Alexandria, according to tradition. This is the great tragedy of Demas. He walked away at the very moment when restoration was still possible. He chose a permanent exit for a temporary fear. Paul did not write that Demas had lost his salvation. He did not say Demas was going to hell. He said, "Demas has deserted me." The loss was not necessarily his soul, but his legacy. He traded his place in the history of the kingdom of God for a few more years of quiet life in Thessalonica. We must distinguish between apostasy and desertion. Apostasy is the total rejection of Christ. Desertion is the abandonment of the post. Demas was a deserter. He was a man who still believed in the truth, but was no longer willing to pay the price for it. How many of us are living in our own version of Thessalonica right now? We believe the Bible. We love the idea of Jesus, but we have carefully constructed our lives to avoid any real sacrifice. We have moved away from the front lines where the battle is fierce, and we have settled in the suburbs of the faith where everything is safe and comfortable. Paul continues his letter with an urgent request. "Do your best to come to me before winter." This was not just about the cold. In the ancient world, the Mediterranean Sea closed for shipping during the winter months. The storms were too violent. If Timothy did not arrive before the first frost, the seas would be impassable. Paul would be alone for months. He might even be executed before Timothy could ever say goodbye. There was a window of opportunity, a deadline on obedience. Demas had that same window. He could have stayed for that one last winter. He could have been the one to bring Paul his cloak. He could have been the one to hold the parchment while Paul dictated his final thoughts. But he missed it. He chose the warmth of Thessalonica over the winter of the mission. And history is silent on what happened next. There is no record of Demas ever returning. There is no gospel of Demas. There are no churches named after him. There is only that one sentence in the second book of Timothy, a sentence that stands like a tombstone over a dead legacy. But the story does not end with a closed door. It ends with a choice that you are making at this very moment. A choice that will determine if you are remembered as a Luke, a Mark, or a Demas. The end of the story is both quiet and devastating. History tells us that in the year 67 or 68 Anno Domini, the Apostle Paul was taken from the Mamertine prison. He was led out of the city, past the gates, to a place called 𝘿𝙀𝙈𝙼 on the Ostian Road. There, under the grey Roman sky, the greatest missionary the world had ever seen knelt in the dirt. The executioner's sword was raised, and in a single stroke, Paul finished his race. Luke was likely nearby. Timothy was trying to get there before winter. Mark was on his way, but Demas was 800 miles away. He was in Thessalonica. He was probably eating a good meal. He was probably breathing the fresh salt air of the Aegean Sea. He was safe, he was alive, and he had lost everything. Demas likely lived for many more years. We can imagine him as an old man, perhaps sitting in a church in Thessalonica. Maybe someone would ask him, "Were you not with the great apostle Paul in the early days?" And Demas would have to look at his hands, hands that were clean of blood, but also empty of the glory of the finish line, and say, "Yes, I was there." But he would know, and God would know, that when the fire was hottest, he walked away. He saved his biological life, but he lost his story. He chose the present world, and the present world eventually grew old and died, just like he did. If the story of Demas has gripped your heart today, it is because there is a little bit of Demas in all of us. We all have a Thessalonica. We all have a place where we want to run when the pressure of the cross becomes too much. I want you to do 3 things right now. First, leave a comment below. Be honest. Tell me what your Thessalonica looks like. What is the thing that tempts you to walk away from the mission? Is it fear? Is it the desire for comfort? Is it the need for approval? When we name our traps, they lose their power over us. Second, if you have not already, subscribe to this channel. We do not just tell stories here. We uncover the DNA of the men and women who shaped history. We look at the heroes and the failures because both have something vital to teach us about our own journey. Third, share this video. There is someone in your life right now who is quietly drifting toward Thessalonica. They have not left the faith yet, but they have left the post. They are tired. They are scared. They need to hear that desertion does not have to be the final chapter, because this is not just ancient history. This is about your legacy. You are facing the same choice Demas faced. You might not be facing Nero, but you are facing a culture that hates your values. You are facing an economy that demands your soul. You are facing 1,000 tiny voices telling you to just be safe, just be normal, just love this world. Demas chose this world, and his name lives forever as a warning. Luke chose the mission, and his name lives forever as an example. Mark chose to return, and his name lives forever as a testimony of grace. Which one are you? The voice of Paul still echoes through the centuries, calling out from that cold dungeon, "Come quickly." It is not a call to condemnation. It is a call to the front lines. It is a call to realize that this world is passing away, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. If you have been living in Thessalonica, safe, comfortable, but disconnected from the real purpose of your life, you can still come back. The winter has not come yet. The shipping lanes are still open. The grace of God is still calling your name. Do not let your story end with the words, "Because he loved this world." Rewrite the ending today. Step out of the comfort, pick up your cross, and finish the race that is set before you. The Mamertine prison is empty now. It is a tourist site. But the choice remains as real as it was in the year 67 Anno Domini. May the story of Demas remind you today that loving this world costs more than you can afford to pay, that deserting the mission loses more than you can imagine, and that it is never, ever too late to turn your ship around and head back toward the light. May the Lord bless you with the courage of Luke and the restoration of Mark. I will see you in the next video. God bless you.